Good morning to you.
Good morning.
I'm glad you're here. This morning we have some difficulty with expectations, don't we? Job has been a righteous man his whole life. His expectation from that time in the world is that he should have a life of plenty, a life of peace, of rest. And that's not what he's been experiencing. His friends come with the expectation that if Job is suffering, it must mean that he has in some way sinned against God. And for the first 3/4 of the book of Job, they have been having this conversation back and forth between Job and his friends. His friends saying, "What did you do?" And Job saying, "I didn't do anything. This is undeserved. And if God were here, I'd tell it to God's face." And now today God shows up in the whirlwind and says, "Who are you? Where were you when I laid the foundations of the earth? Tell me if you're able." The expectations that we lay on God, that we lay on each other, are sometimes not only misplaced, but blind us to seeing the realities around us. We hear that in our gospel loud and clear. Jesus has told his disciples 3 times that he's going to go to Jerusalem and be handed over and suffer and die. And the expectation of the disciples is still that they're going to march into Jerusalem, kick out Rome, and Jesus will take the seat of David as king and reign in peace. And so James and John are coming to Jesus with this expectation, saying, we want you to do whatever we ask you. We want to sit at the right and left hand of you when you come into your power. And Jesus is speaking from the knowledge of what's going to happen. It's an ominous statement that he makes. Can you drink the cup that I'm going to drink from? Can you be baptized with the baptism I'm going to be baptized with? And they're thinking, yeah, this will be great. So there's this ironic interchange between them this morning based on their expectations and what we know is going to happen. The expectation of the high priest was not an expectation so much of compassion as it was that they would do their sacrificial duties to expiate the sins of the people. Being of that order of Melchizedek is a different kind of high priest that takes us back to the story of Abraham and Sarah wandering in the wilderness, well before the rest of the Israelites were wandering in the desert for 40 years. They happen upon these priests that bless them and give them a new name. And they're transformed from Abram and Sarai to Abraham and Sarah. These priests on the order of Melchizedek are priests that bless, that transform, that change things, that upend our expectations. And that is the high priest that Jesus is in our readings. This all factors in, of course, to the ways that we're in relationship with each other. Our expectations often get in the way. We see someone for their titles, or for their job, or as a parent, or as someone who has grown to a certain age in their adolescence and therefore must be a certain way. And often we're surprised by what we find. Luke wants to go trick-or-treating. He's a freshman in high school. We might expect that at this age he wouldn't want to do that, but what's to make us expect that? You get to dress up and get free candy. It's awesome. So we're going to Larry and Molly's neighborhood because, well, as the kids say, they give out full-size candy bars in that neighborhood. But it's also a place where Luke's not going to run into anyone he knows. And so he can feel comfortable going out and dressing up and going trick-or-treating. He also wants to participate in giving out candy to the younger kids. He's at that point where he is in both spaces. There's a poem that I want to share from you. Many of you have probably heard of it. It's The Invitation by Uriah Mountain Dreamer. It sort of gets to the heart of this expectation that we have around people and people's needs and what they need and what they want. It doesn't interest me what you do for a living. I want to know what you ache for, and if you dare to dream of meeting your heart's longing. It doesn't interest me how old you are. I want to know if you will risk looking like a fool for love, for your dreams, for the adventure of being alive. It doesn't interest me what planets are squaring your moon. I want to know if you have touched the center of your own sorrow, if you have been opened by life's betrayals, or have become shriveled and closed from fear of further pain. I want to know if you can sit with pain, mine or your own, without moving to hide it, or fade it, or fix it. I want to know if you can be with joy, mine or your own. If you can dance with wildness and let ecstasy fill you to the tips of your fingers and toes, without cautioning us to be careful, be realistic, or to remember the limitations of being human. It doesn't interest me if the story you're telling me is true. I want to know if you can disappoint another to be true to yourself. If you can bear the accusation of betrayal and to not betray your own soul. I want to know if you can be faithful and therefore trustworthy. I want to know if you can see beauty even when it is not pretty every day, and if you can source your life from God's presence. I want to know if you can live with failure, yours and mine, and still stand on the edge of a lake and shout to the silver of the full moon, yes. It doesn't interest me to know where you live or how much money you have. I want to know if you can get up after a night of grief and despair, weary and bruised to the bone, and do what needs to be done for the children. It doesn't interest me who you are or how you came to be here. I want to know if you will stand in the center of the fire with me and not shrink back. It doesn't interest me where or what or with whom you have studied. I want to know what sustains you from the inside when all else falls away. I want to know if you can be alone with yourself and if you truly like the company you keep in the empty moments. So often in our relationships, we care so deeply about the people who are struggling that we want to fix it for them. I'm sure we all have those fixers in our lives that you go to and try to unload some trying, stressful, awful experience you've had, and they jump right to solutions. And sometimes we just need to be heard. The expectation is, I'm telling you this, I'm hurting, and I want you to help me fix it. But sometimes the reality is just, I'm feeling this. And I need you to be with me. A lot of you know that Luke has been struggling with mental health, and he's doing so much better. But the reality of those moments for him was needing to be seen, needing to be heard. Sorry. Not needing to be fixed, but acknowledging what he was feeling, acknowledging where he was in his development. His friend groups were breaking up as he started high school. His teachers hadn't studied his IEP to know what he needed yet. He just wants to be normal and fit in, and having to advocate for himself in front of a whole class of people makes him feel like he sticks out. We each have these experiences in our lives where we need to be seen, heard, where we need others to hear our truth and just enter into it with us. The gift that we can give each other in those moments is being willing, as Uriah Mountain Dreamer says, to stand in the fire with them, to share their pain without seeking to fix it. There comes a time when we're ready for solutions, and sometimes we ask for help with those. In our first reading today, Job has been suffering. He doesn't need his friends to come and tell him he must have sinned, or that he's done something wrong, or what has he done to deserve this, because there's got to be something. He just needs them to be with him. The arrival of God on the scene in that reading is a reminder that God is with us. Our expectations are sometimes that God is too invisible, too distant to understand who we are right now, or to be with us in our sorrow and pain. Oftentimes faith is seen as put on a smile because everything's going to be okay somewhere far off in the clouds. The reality of faith is that God is with us in our hard times, and that through each other, through our relationships that sustain us, we get to be with each other as Christ's hands and heart in those hardest moments of our lives. We don't have to be alone, and we also get to be that presence that reassures someone else that they don't have to be alone. The themes from last week's readings and this week's readings overlap quite a bit. But where we have this special moment this week is in that expectation. And sometimes the biggest gift we can give is to lay our expectations down and to just listen. Just be there with each other. To truly hear another person's truth and perspective. We might find that we'll learn something profound. Not just about the other person, but about ourselves. And it isn't going to be in finding a solution immediately, but sometimes just being in that moment. Inviting God to be part of it. Opening our hearts to each other. And finding ourselves. Finding ourselves. May we find that space this week to listen. To be present to those perhaps that we're so used to that we stop hearing what they're saying because we think we already know what they're going to say. May we find that space to be present enough in ourselves to speak our truth to those who matter to us most. May we find ourselves open to God's presence in those moments. There is such a reality in the statement that when 2 or 3 are gathered, Christ is in their midst. We get to be Christ to one another, hearing, sharing, living in that space of being servants to one another and also allowing ourselves to be served. It's a space of grace. We don't have to have all the answers. We get to just be there. And sometimes that's more than enough. Amen.